back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. 6 years and 400 plus episodes aired every Tuesday and Friday. I am privileged to interview some of the world's most renowned thought leaders, creators, artists, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, CEOs, people that may or may not be a household name, and sometimes, in some cases, people that have suffered some significant setback or even tragedy and both live to tell about it and summon the courage to share their learnings. Other times it's poets and authors and people that have dedicated much of their life, their creativity, their genius, their passion on a particular area and come on this podcast to inspire each of us to ignite our own geniuses, to live our own great purposes, and also to be better leaders. Our co-founder was Dr. Stephen R. Covey, of course, the author of the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Franklin Covey now, 4 decades as the world's most trusted leadership firm, allows me to use this megawatt spotlight, if you will, to shine the light on people that we think will invest in you and make you a better leader. Today, our guest is a friend of mine and a former Franklin Covey executive leader. His name is Bill Bennett. He has been a CEO and founder of many technology leadership coaching companies around Utah and the nation, and is known to millions as an author of a different genre. Today, we're going to talk with Bill Bennett about several books he's written. You might call them parables or fables or fiction stories, but they all fall into a similar genre, and that is tender and sweet and kind and inspiring. And today we're going to talk about the content of his books and also pick out some insights from what Bill has done, which is to build a separate authorship career that many millions of you have an inkling you might like to do. So stand by for a great conversation. Bill Bennett, welcome to On Leadership.
Thanks so much, Scott.
So Bill, I've been chasing you for quite some time. You've been a bit of a reluctant guest, I know, because you wonder, so how does my writings fit into a leadership podcast? Well, we know that any conversation with a creator, which you are, an artist, an author, helps people to be better communicators. I think writing fiction probably helps you write nonfiction, although I've never written a fiction word. Well, my wife might disagree, but intentionally, I'm not known as a fiction writer. Bill, you and I have been friends for many decades. You were a transition figure in my life as a leader in this organization, and since then, you've gone on to lead other companies, including become a very successful writer in what might be known as the fiction space. Would you indulge me today and rewind a couple of decades and reorient yourself to all of our listeners and viewers around the world? A little bit about you personally, a little bit about you professionally.
Sure, yeah. Grew up in the East Coast on the shore of New Jersey. Went to school back there. Majored in a pre-law program, which made me decide I want to do anything in the world except be a lawyer. Went through various roles in my career and located out west a little after I graduated. Met my wonderful wife out here. We've raised 4 children. We have 7 grandchildren. And wanted to write my entire life, but took the first step in that about 15 years ago.
So Bill, one of the reasons I've had you on today is when I interview CEOs, which is by the hundreds, I always ask them the same thing, or anybody in the C-suites, and I say, hey, what are the skills and talents that my 3 sons, who you know fairly well, that are 10, 12, and 14, what are they going to need to thrive in the world? And what is fascinating is never is it coding, never is it AI, rarely is it project management. Every C-suite leader says interpersonal communication, the ability to express yourself, the ability to condense and reduce your thoughts into writing. This is a talent that all of us are going to need to maintain, including in a world of AI. You are a masterful writer. You do something that I do not do well. I share in common with you an author. I'm a nonfiction author, and so are you when it comes to business documents and white papers and blogs and articles and columns. But you have fashioned yourself into a very credible fiction writer. In fact, just this week, I was reading your most recent release, Jacob T. Marley, that we'll talk about, and I was actually stunned to see a whole other side of you, which is to write in this fiction way. It's almost like I don't know you. Like, who are you? Because I know you as a very seasoned executive business leader. First and foremost, how did you get the bug to write this genre of book that we see in front of us. Your most recent book, Jacob T. Marley. Before that, The Last Man at the Inn, and other books that have sort of a Christmas gratitude, generosity spirit. Talk about how you discovered this, maybe how you ignited this passion and talent in yourself.
Well, as I said in my introduction, I always wanted to write. I'm not sure why. Probably began with just loving telling stories. I loved entertaining people. I loved a good story. Told a lot of stories to my mother to get out of trouble and had some success with that. And I was privileged in 6th grade to have a teacher that knew at the time a famous science fiction author Lester Del Rey, brought him into our class to tell us about writing. And I thought, I can tell stories and make a living doing that. And I signed up in 6th grade in my head that says eventually that's what I want to do. So that's what led me to the writing passion.
Well, it is a true talent. I mean, writing, as I was rereading this book last evening, I was texting you about it because I was comparing and contrasting my skill to your skill. And I'm actually a fairly adept nonfiction writer. I've authored 9 books. I've published 7. I like to write in my voice. I'm not a Pulitzer Prize winning author, but I can write decently when it comes to business correspondence and fiction books, business books, mentorship, leadership coaching. But it is a completely different talent and skill to be able to write not just fiction, but to almost write in a different language. This book, Jacob T. Marley, is what is known as, Ebenezer Scrooge, kind of before, kind of like the Wicked, if you will, to the Wizard of Oz. Where did you develop a talent to write almost in a little bit of a different era, a different language? It's English, but a different communication style. This is a unique talent, sir.
Well, thank you. A couple of points. One is, even though I've only written 5 books, I've always, throughout my business career, I used storytelling as a way to communicate. So I felt that, in fact, the publisher, when they met with me on the Marley idea, I didn't think wanted to meet with me and seemed very reluctant and asked me the question, what makes you think you're a good writer? And I actually said, I'm not really sure I'm a good writer, but I know I'm a pretty good storyteller. And so on a general basis, when I write, I'm just telling a story, and sometimes I'll speak out loud as I do that writing to make sure I think the story flows. When it came to this book, as we'll talk about, this is, you mentioned as Wicked is to Wizard of Oz, this is to Christmas Carol. Part of the beauty of Christmas Carol, besides the marvelous story, is, of course, Dickens' language. And I felt if I was going to do this, I would have to somehow find a way. I can't do Dickens exactly, but my goal was what I call Dickens light. How could I write it in such a way that it sounded like him? And honestly, I read Christmas Carol cover to cover 5 times in a row. I did that in 1 week. I did it each day. And, I just found that once I did that, you start to notice these very subtle conventions that Dickens used to communicate, and started working on that. And they just sort of found their way into the story naturally at that point.
Well, I think it's masterful. This particular book is called Jacob T. Marley. Before Ebenezer Scrooge, there was Jacob T. Marley. And what I found interesting is you actually build a backstory that you make up around his ancestry, I'm guessing. I've not read The Christmas Carol more than once, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But I found it fascinating how you made up these backstories, and there was this fire and the kids that he saved and how he died in his grave. And I was so interested. I don't read a lot of fiction. Maybe I'm easily impressed. I don't think that's the case. How do you go about making up backstories and deciding it's a credible backstory? It adds value to the reader. It's not superfluous, but it's part of painting the picture. How and where do you decide how far to go?
Well, I actually back into the backstory. And what I mean by that is I get my main storyline. I developed my main ideas of how I wanted this book to flow, and then created backstory that would support the points I was trying to make. So as an example, for those who've read Christmas Carol or seen one of the 60 different movie versions that have come out, Scrooge had a hard upbringing. He was sequestered in a boys' boarding school and went through a number of other things. in exploring Marley, I didn't want to give him an excuse as to why he was the way he was. In fact, I wanted to show that he had a very normal, loving upbringing, but he turned against it. So once I had that point, I kind of went backwards and said, what could be a credible way to explain this? And it was, and on top of it, one that, even though that's happening in the storyline in the late 1700s, one that any of us would say, oh my gosh, I get it. You know, I've been that road, or I have a loved one who's been that road. And it was basically good boy, coming from a loving family, kind of tempted by the things in the world that played to his ego, and was eventually led off track. And then all I had to do was say, now, how does that story occur in 1795 instead of 2020? And did a lot of homework to make that seem realistic.
Bill, this book is titled Jacob T. Marley. We've talked a little bit about it. Will you share a little more? What a fantastic holiday gift for someone, or a Christmas present. Talk a little bit about what unfolds in the book without giving away the key points.
Sure, yeah. So what the book's about is, it's about the story of Marley, who we know is Scrooge's partner. And what I explore is, so where did he come from? But most importantly, how did he and Scrooge come together? And what caused Marley to be able to come back to Scrooge as a ghost and warn him about his own life, and hopefully warn him and scare him enough that he wouldn't replicate the eventual fate that Marley had. And so we're kind of, somebody referred to this as a prequel, a sequel, and a backquill. And I don't think backquill is actually a word, but we're going through the Christmas Carol story, except from Marley's point of view. It begins before Christmas Carol, but once you get into Christmas Carol, I'm actually moving between Christmas Carol and my own story. So something will happen that you'll recognize from Christmas Carol, but you're seeing it from Marley's point of view, and it'll kind of explain what's going on. And so why did he come to visit Scrooge? What was his intention? What was going on as the three ghosts visited Scrooge, and what happened in the end? And for anybody that loves Christmas Carol, it not only kind of fills out the story, but Dickens also left several hooks in the story that he didn't ever answer. And in reading some of Dickens' letters to his best friend, John Forster, there's some suggestions that Dickens intended to write a sequel. And so I'm thinking that's why he left the hooks in there, but I took advantage of them since he never did it.
Bill, this is a leadership podcast, but we talk about a lot of things. Discovering your purpose in life, healing from trauma, building community, learning to forgive, understanding the role gratitude plays, lots of different components to this podcast. What do you want the reader or listener in audio form to take away from your most recent book, Jacob T. Marley?
I think there's several things that I'd love people to have taken away from it. But one of them is the impetus to say, hey, I'm a good person. I try to do good things, but I've made mistakes, and I've broken some glass along the way. And is there any of that glass I need to sweep up? Is there anybody that I should reach out to, that there might be a hard feeling left behind that I need to address or soften? Or, is there anybody that perhaps I haven't done anything to, but I could have helped and didn't? And, they've been in my mind periodically, and to take action and to do something for them. It's not intended to inflict guilt whatsoever. It's intended to kind of motivate us to enrich our relationships with other people by paying attention to those sometimes nagging feelings that we have when a name pops in our mind over and over again, and doing something about it.
Bill, let's talk about the writing process, because I believe most people, lots of people, want to write a book or have a book in their head, or they don't know what the process is. And you and I have that in common, but you've done something that I've not, which is to really unleash your creativity in the fiction format. Would you just kind of indulge us and talk about what is your writing process? First of all, how do you envision the next book you're going to write? What is your research? How do you discipline yourself? Do you have a room, a process, a certain typewriter, time of day, a period? Maybe you could just share with us what works for you because I know you will ignite some genius and passion and people around the world listening.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, from a process standpoint, when I'm going to start working on a new story, I create virtually, think of it as just the shoebox where you just start dropping ideas. When I start to think about a story, all of a sudden, you get these new lenses on, and you start to see aspects that you might be able to use in that story all around you. So between just dictating on my cell phone or literally taking a post-it note and jotting it down, I just start collecting ideas. There's no organization to them. I just have them in a big pile. And when I actually start to begin a book, I'm a very visual person, and even though there's a lot of versatility to doing everything digitally, I need to get these things on paper, and I'll create 50, 60 post-it notes so I can see everything and start arranging them on the wall in front of me and begin to craft how would I weave these things into a storyline. When it comes to day to day, I don't know. I'm not speaking for any other author in the world. I may be the only person that operates this way, but for me, I know my creative times are in the morning. And so my best writing occurs, I'll get up, do a few things in the morning to kind of set my day, go for a walk or a quick run. But I try to, when I'm actively writing, I try to be writing by 8 o'clock in the morning. And I know I'm good till probably noon. So I get, 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 good hours in there, maybe go a little bit further. I need a break. I need a physical break. And then when I'm writing full time, obviously I'm working all day, but I found that what's best in the afternoon is I turn my attention to editing. So I'll go back and edit what I wrote that morning, or perhaps unfinished editing from prior days. Spend time with my wife, dinner time in the evening. We're empty nesters at this point. But then I frequently get this creative burst late. So sometimes I will get back to my desk 9:30, 10 o'clock at night and just scribble for another hour. Maybe I'll go right in and write, or maybe I'll just take notes. But I know my creative moments, and I try to really not only do creative work in the creative time, but do what I can to magnify that. You mentioned this. I love my desk. I love my writing office. I love my chair. I spent $1,000 on a chair because I found with this much time in it, I really wanted to be comfortable. And I just make the environment something that literally every time I walk in here, I think to myself, I love this place.
I think it's a great insight. One of the many insights I took as the host of this podcast, I was once interviewing Dan Pink. Everyone knows who Dan Pink is. And he wrote a book called When, all about timing. And I don't know how I got to age 56 and never heard this before, but we all have a circadian rhythm, right? And we have our peaks and our troughs and our recoveries. Like you, my peak is actually in the morning, 4 a.m. to about 11. And then I go through a bit of a trough from 11 to 1. I have a recovery from about 1 to 5, but not much after that. You have a burst at the end of the day. I think I do also tell a lot of writers, find out what your circadian rhythm is. When are you most creative? And write during that time. Do you always write in sequence? Do you always write sort of chronologically? How do you deal with that?
Oh, I make a huge mess of the timeline. I mean, I'll maybe start that way, but then I'll get in writing. Actually, all the books I wrote happened in Marley as well. Is you'll get this kind of flash of an idea, and I'll put it aside, and I'll go write that section, and then leave it there, come back to my storyline, and then reconnect it. This is writing the kind of books you do, nonfiction, business books, or anything like that. I don't think you have that liberty. But in fiction, I'm in charge of the universe. I can make it work any way I want to. And so I go where I feel inspired, and then kind of take the Lego blocks and put them together and glue them down when I'm ready.
Bill, how much do you erase or throw out or unwind? That's hard for a writer, right? Because words are precious and you don't want to waste them or throw them out. But do you ever find yourself writing for an hour or two and reading it and saying, this is nonsense, I'm going to take it somewhere else? How much liberty do you give yourself to erase what you've written?
Yeah, I think it's a great point to bring up, Scott, for anybody who wants to write. Because once you've written a word, getting rid of it is like getting rid of a child that you had. I mean, it might be terrible writing, but your heart was still in it. I'd say, when I was when I write full time, I'm writing 6 days a week. I'd say one of those days I probably throw out most of what I did that day.
Hmm.
And then when I'm really cruising in fiction, I can write about 5,000 words a day. If I'm really doing a lot of back research and trying to get some detail that requires some work, it might only be 1,000 words. But on top of it, when I go back and I've got the book assembled, again, this is probably a unique thing to me, but I have to read the book out loud to myself, because when I hear it, it comes off differently than just reading what I wrote. And inevitably, when I do that, I have that, oh my gosh, what was I thinking with that part? And I'll eject that, and it's incredibly hard. In fact, when I get rid of it, it's all digital, but when I get rid of it, I cut it, but then I save it just in case I change my mind and I want to go back.
Bill, talk about your review loops, independent of the publisher or the editor who may be helping
Mhm.
you wordsmith or line edit or copy edits. What do you do to ensure that you aren't, in a vacuum, right? That you're not just groupthink, all your best friends, your mom and your wife, oh my gosh, you're a genius, son. Do you tend to have a group of people that you shop it to, that you trust to eviscerate it? What do you do to make sure you're not writing in a total vacuum?
Yeah, I do have a group of people that I trust, and it's a fairly limited group. I mean, the two major requirements are they have to like the genre that I'm in. Asking somebody who doesn't like the genre, which I made the mistake of the first time I wrote, came back and rewrote a couple paragraphs for me that were just, I didn't ask for that. It was awful. So requirement one is they've got to enjoy this genre. And requirement two is they've got to be willing to stand up and speak straight to me. And I've got a few people. One of those is my son, who likes what I like, and doesn't feel any hesitation to tell me the things that didn't work for him. And so I've got 3, 4 people like that I will turn to on a pretty regular basis, not only to read what I wrote and give me feedback, but to let me bounce an idea off. I've got this idea, I don't have a word down yet, but what about this? Does this idea compel you? And get that feedback from them.
Bill, speak to our yet to be published, yet to begun writers that are watching and listening around the world. I'm guessing you did not spend lots and lots of money getting a master's degree in creative writing. I'm guessing you didn't fly off to California for week retreats to learn how to write. Maybe you did. Is there any wisdom you might give to someone who has an idea, but they honestly just don't know where to start? I mean, they've got a laptop, but they don't know where to begin. Any permission or tools or motivation you might ignite to those who are thinking, I want to start, I just don't know how?
Sure. Yeah. I had the opportunity several years ago to share a meal with Mark Victor Hansen, I think his name is,
Sure.
and wrote co-authored Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I won't stand behind this statistic, but what he said to me is 99% of the people in the world believe they have a book in them. 1% will ever start it, and 1% of that group will ever finish it. And so, probably just if somebody asked me to give them brief advice, the first thing I'd say is writing is a muscle, and it's really hard work. And you don't build a muscle until not only you use it, but you break it down. And you have got to write a lot to get that muscle going. You don't have to write books a lot. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got is to write a reflective journal entry as often as I can. Typically for me, it would be in the morning. Not this is what I did yesterday, but some reflection on something. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one I'd probably say is, and I'm not unique in saying this, but write the thing you're passionate about. If you care about it, there's at least one other person on earth that might care about that subject as well. And if you think, well, I don't know if more than 10 people are going to buy this. If your sole goal is economic, or at least if one of your major goals is economic, then I guess don't write it. But at least start by figuring out, how do I translate my passion on this subject into words? And to do that, like I said, to work it and work it and work it. And I would say, probably the last thing is you got to be really self-aware of what you're not good at and be unafraid to get help. So, for example, an editor, when I wrote Marley, sat with me, an editor at the publisher, and just was very complimentary. He said, "I sobbed reading your book. I thought it was beautiful. I love the messages. You have the worst grammar of anybody I've ever edited. And if you don't mind, I'm going to fix a lot of it." Well, part of that is Dickens' fault because I was trying to replicate Dickens, but I it didn't bother me, and I realized I need grammatical help. I don't have a degree in writing, um, and I know that I murder the English language occasionally. But my job is to get that storyline, get those connections, tell the story, and then be unafraid to turn to somebody and say, "I need editing help."
Let's talk about storytelling,
Yeah.
because I think this is a skill that is ubiquitous in leadership and business and in life,
Hmm.
in relationships, and also in fiction and nonfiction writing. Any principles or tenets that you might share with people who either don't think they're a great storyteller or want to be a better storyteller or want to use this as a leadership tool to inspire vision and clarify strategy and coalesce around purpose? Anything you've learned about what it means to be both a great storyteller orally, but also that same skill applied in print or digital?
Sure. There's an old writing saying, I think it came from a Russian author, you might know it, that says, "If there's a gun over the mantle, it better shoot." Um, and the idea being, if you're describing, for example, a cabin, and you mentioned that there's a gun over the mantle, if you're telling it in your story, if you're writing it in the story, either way this applies, there better be a reason you said it. I mean, maybe the gun's going to become part of the story, or maybe it's nothing more than suggesting this person might be a hunter or something about them. But I find in people that I have a lot of respect for, but maybe are not as strong in storytelling and leadership, is they fill the story with all this periphery information that doesn't have anything to do with the point they're trying to make. And yet you don't want to go too far the other direction and just be so sterile that says, here's something I want you to remember. You have to flesh out the story. You have to give it a little bit of surround sound, but you want to be um, strict with yourself about how much you put in there. Everything has to contribute somehow to the point you're trying to make. And as we know, every story has an arc. So you've got to be able to follow that arc. You can't spend too long at a place that, you're going to lose people, and you've got to make your point.
Bill, your books have sold tens of thousands of copies in not just print, softcover, hardcover, but tens of thousands of copies in digital and audio.
Mhm.
And you also have a little bit of experience when it comes to bringing your book to life on what might be like the screen. Talk a little bit about what that process has been like to have your books optioned, and is there anything on the horizon that might be coming your way that people could look forward to?
Well, let's be careful about the second part of that, but I'll do my best to explain it. Um, the first book I wrote was self-published, and so I've been completely involved in the optioning process, and I had no idea what I was doing, but somebody expressed interest in a movie. Um, I did my homework and went out and found what optioning was like, and there's an awful lot we could talk about, but primarily it's they pay for the right, but the right has an expiration date, and so it's been in the first book I wrote, that's been, I think, 2 cycles of somebody paying me for the right, and then the right expired. Um, we've had a lot of interest that's come forward in Marley, and in this case, the publisher owns the book, so the publisher is the person that those with interest in making the movie negotiate with. But my publishers kept me very involved in those conversations. And when you're talking to someone who possibly wants to make the movie, if you've been hoping that, for the first thing happens is, how much money have they got? And your eyes pop open. You really gotta not jump too fast, and you've got to be sure that their vision for how they see a movie matches your vision for your story. Because in most cases, once that is signed and released, unless you can create some special contract provisions, you're not going to have a lot of control over what happens to that movie. So you want to make sure that you share your feelings about that story. And then, we've got we've got some very exciting possibilities coming up on optioning Marley for a movie. And one of the things that I asked for is I said, I don't need creative control or any of that, but I really would like to be part of the discussions. And honestly, I'd like to be on set. And the movie folks explained that they would prefer that because they're always interpreting.
Yeah.
And they said, if we get to a place here where we've got something you spent 12 pages on and we have to execute it in a minute and a half, it would be really helpful as you look at the script to help us figure out what are the key points to this play. As long as you understand, Bill, that you're not the final word, we'd like you involved. And I think for somebody who loves their story, that's a great opportunity. And I think, as I'll find out, the one thing you got to do is know your place when you get on the set.
Bill, clearly the writing thing's working out for you. I sure hope the optioning for movies does as well. But if ever you decide to pivot, what a great coach you would be, helping people find their voice and helping them put a structure together on writing, because you've done this. You said only 5 books. You've written 5 books that have sold very well. Okay, my last question. Probably my favorite part of these interviews is asking what's next. And some share abundantly and some say nothing. I'd love to know from you, what's next? Do you have an idea for a book? Can you share it? Can you give us a sense for where the next Bill Bennett book might take shape?
Well, I have one finished that I'm shopping. I have one that I'm in the middle of, and I have one that is an outline on paper. And that I'll tell you that the first one that is finished is very similar to these. It doesn't have anything to do with Christmas, but it's very much the same kind of a story. It's just sort of examining the human experience. And the one that's underway is similar to Marley in that I'm grabbing onto an existing story and adding some surround sound and a kind of a supplementary story to that. And this last one, I'll just say, I'm going to take a leap. I'm going to really try to get out of my genre. One of my heroes as authors is Lauren Hillebrand, and I believe she only wrote 2 books, both of which were spectacular. But I'm trying to try her same treatment, writing about the life story of the Intrepid, a World War II aircraft carrier.
Not where I thought you were going, sir.
Okay.
But I'm honored to have you share that. Bill Bennett, author on the rise. His most recent book, Jacob T. Marley, the prequel, if you will, to Scrooge, Christmas Carol. Bill, thanks for joining us today. Look forward to following your career in the future.
Thanks so much, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.